So today we have with us Dr. Joel Kahn. He is America's Heart Healthy Doc and is the founder of the Kahn Center for Cardiac Longevity. He's a graduate of, he's a summa cum laude graduate of the University of Michigan School of Medicine and is a professor of medicine himself. He's written 3 best-selling books: The Whole Heart Solution, Dead Execs Don't Get Bonuses, and The No BS Diet, science-based recommendations to stay healthy and medication-free without the BS. He's a regular contributor to Mind Body Green, the Huffington Post, Thrill List, and many more websites. His writing is hilarious. He's also the founder of a beautiful restaurant called Green Space Cafe in Detroit, Michigan. So thanks for being with us today, Dr. Kahn.
My pleasure and honor.
Fantastic. Okay, so here's the first question. In today's world, we see the proliferation of the paleo movement that encourages man to eat like a caveman, advocating for the complete elimination of foods like sugar, alcohol, dairy, and packaged foods, which is great. But they also advocate an increase in your meat consumption, which includes large amounts, sometimes large amounts of saturated fat. And you see this all over the place, right? You see fat is back, butter is back, saturated fat is healthy. So millions of people around the world want to believe this message. So they eat more animal products under the guise that it's actually going to make them healthier. And then there's people like you and us and the rest of the speakers on this summit who dedicate our lives to promoting plant-based diets, the exact opposite, because we know the effect of animal products and saturated fat on diabetes, heart disease, and chronic disease. So my question to you is, what is happening here? And why is there this giant nutritional war between the plant-based side and the animal-focused or paleo low-carbohydrate movement?
So, you used a word that I wish we didn't have to bring up, but I fear there really is a war between those that have, and have a lot of presence, academic presence, social media presence, and TV presence, and completely diametrically opposite. We should have in common at least the core: get rid of processed food, celebrate fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes. But even on that basis, particularly the paleo movement, has camps that would, talk negatively about legumes or talk negatively about starchy vegetables, when in fact, those of us, we exist on those. That's the core of our diet. And myself, for nearly 4 decades, disagree. So, why is there? One possibility, and it's well supported, well published by very prominent nutritionists around the world, is that there was a meeting in Mexico City in late November 2008, so about 8 years ago now, of the International Dairy Association, and their notes and their reports are well documented. And they concluded that they were concerned there was a bit of a downturn in support of dairy in the academic world, and they were going to look to identify and support those that would stand behind and even, broadcast the message that dairy particularly was helpful. And within months, you could see that there were keynote speeches going on. One in early 2009, I think it was in Atlanta, but it's again documented. Ronald Krauss, who is a pretty prominent lipid researcher in Oakland, California, was giving the keynote lecture at a major dairy society. And then, just within less than a year, there was the first meta-analysis that is quoted and repeated over and over by the first author, Siri Torino, that really became the rallying call of the high-fat and low-carb group, the paleo group, the Atkins group. They all merged together. And although that was such a flawed meta-analysis that concluded that maybe saturated fat wasn't associated with cardiovascular disease in the diet, it was so flawed that the journal actually published a response in the exact same volume. Dr. Jeremiah Stamler, a very prominent epidemiologist, who had published dozens and dozens of well-respected studies, was given an opportunity to basically slice and dice that study, not in a response a few months later, but in the actual journal. They must have recognized somehow. I don't know the process. You almost never see that. But yet, there's an old tale, go try and get all the feathers out of a feather pillow once you slice it open and let it go. And, once that headline and once those that had a large, following were broadcasting Siri Torino, saturated fat, it just seemed like it just started to steamroll. And then in 2014, when a pretty similar meta-analysis by Chowdhury came to the same conclusion. It never concluded that saturated fat added to the diet was helpful, but questioned the concept that there was a link between dietary saturated fat and cardiovascular disease. It just exploded again. And that same study, there was a major call to retract it by people at Harvard School of Public Health and others. It was a very controversial and flawed meta-analysis, many adjustments and corrections for cholesterol levels and such. So really on the basis of two, what is at least reasonable to say flawed meta-analysis, not original research, we have thrown away from 1913, Anichkov, who did studies on animals and fat intake and pathology of plaque to the current day. We've thrown away over 100 years worth of unbelievably careful metabolic research. Why have we done that? Is it money? Is it influence? Is it the difficulty of following a plant-based diet, which can be recognized maybe to be a bit harder than having steakhouses on every corner and such? But it isn't scientific integrity in my mind, and it has created tremendous ill will, and absolutely has split, the food authors, the food doctors, the bloggers into two very, very angry camps, and it's a shame. And I think it's always follow the money, and I think we know where the big money is, and it's not in starchy vegetables.
It's true.
No.
Not true. So
I will just say I had the pleasure of walking through a farmer's market with Robbie this weekend in LA when I was visiting, and I was trying to imitate a caveman paleo going from fruit stall to fruit stall, but it embarrassed him a little bit, so I had to shut that.
I love it.
I was with a bunch of other people, and they loved Dr. Kahn's company.
I can imagine.
They're the unique group of people that can tell one persimmon from the next, and all 17 varieties of spinach you can buy in LA. I mean, it's really remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, that's one of the cool things about the plant-based diet is there are so many different varieties of all kinds of foods to try. It's really great.
Yes, and not all of us live in one of the highest, most fertile growth basins, but nonetheless.
That's true.
The broad diversity, and now probably flash frozen foods being a nearly, decent substitute to getting it straight from the garden.
Absolutely.
We don't have excuses to have the rainbow pretty much every day.
And it doesn't matter where you live, you can get many varieties of apples, many varieties of pears just at like a Walmart or something. So we're living definitely a generation where we have plenty of options.
Right.
So, so we know you've talked a lot about saturated fat and how it affects cardiovascular health. How does saturated fat affect diabetes health?
Yeah, and this is a point of great confusion because aren't you worried about your blood sugar? So obviously the focus should be sugar. And I think the medical community has bought into that. They haven't really bought into that because you walk into almost any hospital in America and the first thing I see is donuts, and cakes in the lobby. So if they really believe sugar was evil, they would ban that. But I really don't see much attention to really improving public health in hospital lobbies or cafeterias. That's a side issue. But, it seems, and we got to credit the work of a Gerald Schulman at Yale, a very prominent MD, PhD, Dr. Neil Barnard for broadcasting this, Dr. Michael Greger for kind of synthesizing the data, that dietary fat leads to increased triglycerides and serum fats in the blood that get taken up into predominantly muscle cells and liver cells, the two main sources where your circulating blood sugar ultimately will enter into a cell to provide a fuel source. And we've learned that if your dietary fat intake is up, and that translates to high blood fat intake and then high muscle and liver cell fat uptake, intramyocellular lipid accumulation, a real mouthful there, that you will get insulin resistant. And you'll have insulin in your blood if you're not a type 1 diabetic, but it doesn't fit into that key it used to fit into. It doesn't cause the glucose to come out of the bloodstream into the cell to fuel it. So you'll have an elevated blood sugar, and if it's high enough, you'll be a type 2 diabetic. And the root cause seems to be the muscle cell, the liver cell, chock full of little lipid globules. And the real root cause is the diet, high in dietary fat. So although there's clearly a need in today's obese society to be very aware of processed carbs, simple sugars, added sugars, and sweetened beverages, and cooked and baked goods, still the primary defect of the cells seems to be fat accumulation, and responds very well to removing fat from the diet, or at least added fats, added oils. Then you can reverse the insulin resistance.
Yep. That's great. So, okay, back to what we were talking about initially, the war between these people. So they, the paleo people, there's a lot of examples of people who are able to lose weight by eating a lot of these fatty foods. Can you explain how that could happen?
Yeah, there are limited, and I encourage anybody, because it's so easy to access the National Library of Medicine online nowadays. There are, and I probably haven't looked in 6 weeks, but under 24 studies that have looked at a paleo style diet and real hardcore science in terms of some cardiovascular outcome. And so far, the studies have been mainly biomarkers, maybe blood sugar, blood cholesterol, blood pressure, inflammation markers, all of which are important. And all, if they improve, might suggest better cardiac health. But these are relatively short-term studies of 6 or 12 weeks. And there are some that report improvements. Now, these are usually calorie-reduced diets without processed food, with at least some fruits and vegetables. And to follow the paleo theme, they're often without grains, and they have some forms of meats, usually some, quote, better quality grass-fed meats. And there are some improvements out there. You have to recognize and even honor the literature. There also are case studies, like you mentioned, of people who are following a paleo diet with both short-term and sustained weight loss. And the bottom line is anybody can create a 10-day dietary program that works if you restrict calories. And many of these examples are calorie-restricted diets. One just popped in the literature last week, and there was weight loss with a paleo diet, but there was a 20% calorie reduction from baseline in that scientific arm. It wasn't kept on par with what they were doing before the diet. So, I think, again, you have to honor, if you go back, and I've written this very complimentary, if you read Loren Cordain's original book, The Paleo Diet, not further versions, he talks about saturated fat is bad. Eggs are a source of cholesterol and raise your blood cholesterol and promote cardiovascular disease. And the real core is fruits and vegetables. And his first book is really, other than an emphasis on wild meats, if you can get them, is a very reasonable approach to clean up your diet in a way that some people might find easier than a purely plant-based diet. But man, the movement has veered to now it's okay to have, butter in your coffee and full-fat cheese and things that, seem to have violated the original concept of the paleo diet. So they don't even call it that, call it the bulletproof diet, call it, eat fat, get thin diet or something, because it's modified versions. And I don't believe they work. Or if you lose weight, what's happening in your cardiovascular system? Because I think your listeners get this, but there's not a single study of any kind looking at blood vessels. And as a cardiologist, and I keep reminding this of people that discuss it with me personally or on Twitter or wherever the engagements are, it's like Top Gun engagement. Biomarkers are great, but we have the ability to look at blood vessels. We have the ability to look at how they're functioning. We have the ability to look if there's plaque forming or regressing. These are non-invasive, and these are the core in which most cardiology decisions are made. I mean, we don't treat people on their C-reactive protein. We might counsel them and search for a cause, but we treat them on their atherosclerosis. So there's absolutely no data that eating high-fat diets that help you lose weight are also at the same time regressing plaque, when in fact very concerned it's the opposite. Yeah.
I'm actually really glad to hear you say that, because at a plant-based nutrition conference that we were at not too long ago, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn got up and he basically said a very same thing. He said, you can improve your biomarkers, your blood glucose, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, but if you're not testing the condition of your endothelial layer, the inside lining of your blood vessels, you don't have enough information about whether your diet is actually improving your cardiovascular health. And when I heard him say that, it just kind of a light bulb went off in my head, because like you're saying, you don't go to the doctor and get a test for your endothelial lining. At least not that I'm aware of. Is it?
Yeah, you can. I do in my office as an advanced cardiac prevention clinic. There is both a blood test offered that reflects how much nitric oxide you're making. And we don't have any idea in the paleo-based diets how people are responding to that. There is such a blood test that is important and scientifically understood. And then there is an actual kind of device that looks like a blood pressure cuff called the EndoPat. That's FDA approved for endothelial function. I just ask people if they're having solid erections, a pretty good endothelial function. It only works for the males, but it is not a bad parameter. I had a patient email me today that the flagpole was being raised much more efficiently on his plant strong diet. And, I know that means his endothelium is getting better. But the other comment, because it popped in my head about an aspect of the paleo diet that, despite an improvement over the standard American diet and the junk that 60% of calories are in the standard diet. Very prominent paleo, not only prominent, the founder of the term paleo diet in the modern era is Dr. Boyd Eaton. And I don't know that many people know about him because you don't hear about him as much as Lauren Cordain or Gary Taubes or Robert Lustig, and I could go on and on with the Hall of Fame of low carb, high fat diet promoters. Dr. Boyd Eaton was a radiologist that just got very interested into the history of food and the history of diet. In 1985, in the New England Journal of Medicine, considered the most respected journal out there, published an article called Paleolithic Nutrition. And that kind of, and just a few years after that, Lauren Cordain, who called Dr. Eaton his mentor and his hero, published his book called The Paleo Diet. But Boyd Eaton is recognized a radiologist, interestingly, who just had a very bright mind and passion. So in November 2015, at a conference in Boston called Old Ways, I had not heard much about Boyd Eaton in a while, but he got up and gave a very long talk, of which segments are on YouTube, talking about the fact that his original concept is not valid in 2015, 2016, because we're stressing the environment out. He said we simply can't do the paleo diet, and we can't promote meat, and we can't damage the environment any more than we're doing. And I'd like you all to just stop this thing, start eating fruits and vegetables. He called for a vegetarian diet until we figure out an industry or a way to deal with the environment that can overcome the damage that's happened by, I guess that's about 30 years of increasing promotion of meat-based diets and in some circles, denigration of plant-based eating. And I mean, if that's not a important and kind of rallying point for us, that, yeah, I mean, even if we knew that a paleo diet was healthy for your endothelium and your atherosclerotic tendency, we still got to deal with the fact that there's animals being slaughtered and there's forests being raped, there's deserts being created and there's ozone layers being destroyed as we grow as a population. It's simply not responsible, and nobody talks about that. When's the last time you've seen any paleo leader bring up the environment and animal rights as a consistent measure? In fact, when I speak with Nina Teichels on Twitter and I bring that up, oh, that's a different issue. It's not a different issue. Every time you eat, you're voting, for all of those things in terms of the impact of the choices you make or the choices you promote to the public.
Exactly. And I think that's some of that type of information is sometimes it's just kind of swept under the rug. It's like, hey, let's not talk about it, right? Let's leave the skeleton in the closet because it doesn't forward our message. So I'm actually glad to hear you talk about it.
Hey, look, if they had unbelievable data that the paleo diet reverses plaque or prevented diabetes or shrunk cancer, okay, I could see we'll take some damage to the environment. Maybe we'll, have some animals feel some pain. But in the absence of that, to, have a diet without evidence that also damages the environment and causes unbelievable suffering. Why go? No thinking person could possibly conclude that's what should be promoted to the public. But there you go.
That's the way it is. Okay, so here's two questions about saturated and unsaturated fat. Okay, so clearly we find that saturated fat increases your cardiovascular disease risk. It increases your insulin resistance risk, and it increases your risk for type 2 diabetes. So how much saturated fat is okay to eat? Is it binary? You either have some or you don't, or is it a sliding scale?
Yeah. So, I mean, and I think it is a spectrum with the goal being, and again, what we're talking, so the goal being as little as possible. The American Heart Association still talks about 7% of calories in your diet being from saturated fat or less, whereas the current concept by many other experts out there promoting the low carb, high fat diets would be saturated fats 15 to 20, 22% kind of range, with total fat being maybe 50, 60, 70, 80, totally different spectrum. So, I mean, how powerful is a small change? And really, we have to think, I think, in the past about 24 months, the Harvard School of Public Health has published And they're observational studies. You know, we're not going to have a 100,000 patient study where 50,000 eat an all plant diet and 50,000 eat some version of the paleo diet. We're going to follow them for 20 years. I mean, that's a dream. It's not going to happen. So we got to go with what we got. We got to go with Loma Linda and Blue Zones and Adventist and other data sets, whatever they are. So the Harvard School of Public Health has been tracking nurses and doctors for over 30 years in the Nurses Health Study and the Physician Health Study. And they have this crazy large database. And they didn't just take one dietary intake at the beginning of the study 30 plus years ago. They go back and repeat dietary assessments, so they get updated information, one of the strengths of their data set. And they've shown that recently that whatever measure you want, total mortality, cardiovascular events, if you substitute small amounts of saturated fat decrease with polyunsaturated fats like healthy oils, which I'm not a fan of oils, but canola oil, organic, and olive oil are clearly better than butter, lard, and ghee. You can detect, you know, major differences in drops. So they published in the last 3 weeks, Zong, I think is the first author, Z-O-N-G, but if not that, is very close, that just 1% reduction in the amount of saturated fat. So if the American Heart says 7%, you go down to 6%, and you replace it with either complex carbs like legumes, beans, and fruit and vegetables, or even polyunsaturated fats like canola oil and olive oil. You can document about a 10 to 13% drop in dying from heart disease with just a 1% decrease. So, I mean, that's a powerful statement. Each 1% drop, you learn how to, you know, substitute butter with using, you know, some organic jam, and you substitute, you know, cheese with nut-based cheeses, which may have oils and, well, they have fats. They may not have added oils, but there's not going to be any immeasurable saturated fat. And think every percent you drop is another notch of lowering your cardiovascular risk. Still the #1 killer of men and women in America, sometimes tragically at very young ages. This past week in the clinic, I saw a slew of people that had heart attacks in their 30s or early 40s. They were seeing these somewhere down the road in their progress because they were concerned about the future, as they should have been. So 1% change in calorie intake, saturated fat matters. So there's really, it's a spectrum. Go as low as you can. I mean, there's this huge debate over avocados, and I think you're going to get to a list of asking me good, bad. And that's the one thing I got to put my hands up. I don't know. Nobody's studied avocados and endothelial function, avocados and plaque progression or regression. Avocado oil, I wouldn't go near, you know, generally, or I'd at least use it instead of butter, lard, and ghee in a very tiny amount. But the sacred avocado is splitting the food movement into polar expanses, and we've got to have an international avocado agreement that comes up. I really mean it. It's literally nuts that it has a nut in the inside. We can't figure it out. So except for, you know, if you're really trying to lose weight, I would stay away from whole avocados, and I wouldn't eat 5 a day. But I'm pretty happy with avocados in the diet compared to what people are eating. I mean, donuts and cheese, peanut butter crackers out of the gas station.
You were saying how this affects young people. We were just talking about a study where I think that it was like kids in Kentucky or something.
Oh, you and I were talking about, yeah. So, well, the obesity rates in kids is, you know, scary. What is it? About 10% of 5-year-olds are categorized as obese, and by the time you get to 22 years old, 2022, but that's what's a study like that, it's up to about a quarter of all 22-year-olds are obese. But yeah, but actually in Louisiana, Bogalusa, Louisiana, you got to love the name Bogalusa. Dr. Gerald, Professor Jerry, I apologize your last name for a minute. He's been tracking kids by an ultrasound of their carotid, a very accurate way to look for early silent plaque, and 10, 11, 12-year-olds. I mean, routinely, maybe because it's the South, and we do know that the Southern diet is one of the worst examples of the Western diet there is, because there's just more fried food than the average Western diet. But, you know, to document that there's plaque in 10, 11, 12-year-olds pretty routinely, and that was actually studies done 25 years ago. I am certain, although I can't quote you the reference, it's going to be more common now because obesity is highest in the South. It's absolutely tragic, that little triangle in Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, and obesity in adults and children. A whole bunch of theories why it is there, and some of it is environmental toxins, which is very interesting in the cotton industry, in addition to fried food.
Okay, this is fantastic. Dr. Greger also talks about the fact that people who eat meat-based diets and or dairy-based diets show signs of heart disease as early as 10 years old. So maybe he's referencing that same study or a collection of studies that show the same thing.
Yeah.
So, okay, we know saturated fat is detrimental for cardiovascular health. What about unsaturated fat? Okay, so tell us, where does one find unsaturated fat, and what is the upper limit for how much saturated fat do you recommend?
Yeah, so I mean, examples of there's monounsaturated fat, which will be olives if you eat whole olives, and olive oil. There's not much omega-3 fatty acid in olives or olive oil. There is a little saturated fat. I think it's about 15% in olive oil. So if you're trying to reduce that saturated fat, now it's a plant-based saturated fat, just like avocado and coconuts have plant-based saturated fat. There's far less in olive oil than there is in coconut oil. So I stay way, way away from coconut oil just because that enormous 92% saturated fat. And even if you argue some of it's medium chain triglyceride, and maybe that's a fuel for your liver, you still got about half of it is saturated fat that isn't medium chain triglyceride. It's the longer chains that are associated with atherosclerosis. So when you get to unsaturated, there's monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. Monounsaturated, again, we usually think of olive oil. Polyunsaturated are the vegetable oils like canola, like sunflower, like corn oil, soybean oil, and nobody's a big fan in this country of corn oil, soybean oil. Of course, soybean is corn oil completely genetically modified unless it's labeled organic. But when you do look at, there are a few that you can say there may be some value to as a substitute for animal-based saturated fat. So canola oil, which again is another completely genetically modified crop, unless you buy an organic form of canola oil, the only kind I'd ever suggest anybody buy. There was a study in France in the 1990s called the Leon Heart Study. They took the typical French diet. Everybody believes there's no heart disease in France. It's a bunch of nonsense. There's actually a very high risk of heart disease in France. And it was shown in the Leon Heart trial that if you took a typical French diet and you took half the group and told them, instead of the high cheese and butter content of your diet, substitute more polyunsaturated fats. And they used canola oil in that study. They had to stop the Leon Heart trial early. One of the few, everybody had a heart attack. The main factor was what's your risk of a second heart attack by altering your diet in terms of predominantly the source of fats in the diet, saturated versus polyunsaturated. And they had to stop the study early because there was over a 75% drop in recurrent heart attacks when you took the butter away and put in canola oil, polyunsaturated fat. So that's, if it's a spectrum, and that's far better than eating butter, ghee, and cheese, skin of a chicken, and and the yolk of an egg. Sounds like a witch's brew we're making in there. A perfect storm for a heart attack. Now, is it better to move down the spectrum if you've had a previous heart attack and strive to have no added oil in your diets? Yeah, that's clearly better. So, I mean, I think there's the general population, and then there's the group that I tend to see, those that have cardiovascular disease, some of which are very, very serious, previous bypass stents, heart attacks. Their spectrum should be, vitamin E, vitamin Esselstyn. I mean, they really should stay away from oils and oils' impact on endothelial damage. But for those of us, I mean, that are talking, and most of us listening, that don't have known cardiovascular disease, erectile dysfunction, and such, it's probably okay to be, modest in your oils. The American Heart says 7% saturated fat, and I think about 15% total calories. No, they say 25% total calories from fat. I'd go lower than that, but and those fats that I'd want to get solely from whole food, plant-based sources. I mean, nuts have been elevated. Nuts are a source of polyunsaturated fat. Now we're talking whole nuts. And consistently, and again, even this week, there has been some, we still really haven't resolved the avocado issue, but nuts have, kind of fallen back into favor, even in the strictest cardiovascular plant-based diets. A big meta-analysis of over 800,000 people this week showed that eating about 2 dozen almonds a day, which is a handful, or 12 pecan halves, they tend to be bigger than almonds, so they're equivalent to a handful of nuts, dropped a whole bunch of parameters, like infectious disease rates by 75%. Figure that out. Sources of fiber, sources of nutrients, sources of healthier fats than Americans may be eating, because you're going to eat something, and that's always the equation. cardiovascular disease dropped by about 20% with a handful of nuts a day, cancer by 15%. So if you're going to get your polyunsaturated fats, get them from a whole nut, like a walnut, an almond, a Brazil nut, a pecan.
It's great. Okay, another really hot topic I want to talk about here is this whole concept of small dense particles and the large particles, and some are okay and some are not. Can you talk about that whole thing?
Yeah, I've been doing advanced. So if you go to your doctor, if you go to a church, if you get your work physical, you're not going to know that. You're going to get the standard cholesterol profile, total cholesterol, HDL, triglycerides. You do need to be fasting to get a valid fasting triglyceride level. LDL is usually not measured directly. LDL is calculated. So the part of the lipid panel that's most predictive of cardiovascular disease and that cardiologists are taught to monitor and adjust, the LDL is usually actually a calculated number, which is a problem. It's called the Frieden-Wald equation. We learned about it 50 years ago. So advanced cholesterol profiles were developed about a decade ago. I've been using them for about that time, and maybe 10,000 patients by this point. I've looked at so many of them. And you can look at the LDL particle number, the LDL particle size, and then you can look at small LDL particle numbers. And published data from the Framingham study, from something called the MESA trial, show that you can better predict the future development of stroke or heart attack using these advanced lipid profiles. And recently, there's at least one study that says if a clinician will use these advanced profiles, and instead of treating to the LDL, they use that LDL particle number as the goal, which is more stringent, more difficult. Your LDL may look okay, it may be 98, and your normal doctor would say awesome LDL, but when you get the particle number, it's still up. So now we got to keep treating. More diet, more lifestyle, more weight control, and maybe more medication, more flaxseed, and everything else that works. So it matters. Now, I mean, all LDL is associated with cardiovascular disease. So whether it's you're just getting a simple lipid profile and your LDL is up, there's a linear relationship to cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular death. If you're doing the LDL particle number, there is. If you're doing the small LDL particle number, there is. And, the large fluffy LDLs, there still is a relationship. So they're valid and they're useful and they add information. But are there some cholesterols you just ignore and tell the patient, good deal, you got the large fluffy LDLs, and even though they're extremely high, you don't have to worry about it? No, that doesn't seem to be the case. Endothelium can still take them up if damaged, if there's inflammation, if there's lipoprotein A around causing vascular damage, or homocysteine levels causing vascular damage. You still take that fluffy LDL up into your arteries and begin the process of plaque development. So, the best cholesterol is a low cholesterol, and you make plenty of vitamin D, and you make plenty of sex steroids, you make plenty of cell membranes in your brain. There's a genetic disorder where you run a lower LDL than the average American, and you do it for your whole life, from birth, your whole life, and there's a horrible side effect if you run low cholesterol your whole life. It's called you live longer than the average American. And that's been the data, and that's not, there's genomic-wide analysis, or that's a big mouthful for some of the people listening. But I was involved in a study at Wayne State University where we modeled what would happen if from children all the way up, their cholesterol was lower than average, and we came up with the same conclusion in like 300,000 genetic analyses. You just have a much lower risk of heart disease if you could keep your cholesterol down your entire life.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that both the small dense LDL particles as well as the large fluffy LDL particles are both atherogenic, meaning that they actually are going to promote cardiovascular disease. It's just that the large fluffy LDL particles seem to be less detrimental than the smaller dense particles.
Yeah, and that's true. And the relationship to this argument is the paleo movement. Dr. Ronald Krauss, that's his area of research, Oakland, California, will point to the fact that the high-fat, low-carb diet may convert some of the small, dense LDL to an altered panel that more of the larger LDL particle numbers. But they're all atherogenic, and so has the Ornish data. The Ornish diet that showed reversal of cardiovascular disease, published in 1990, 1998, something there's no paleo data equivalent for, showed also a decrease in small, dense LDL particle numbers in a sub-study that was published. So, it gets down to that question. If you're going to try and be thin, lower your cholesterol, control your blood sugar? Do you want to do it with a dietary plan that also happens to have mortality advantage, has cardiovascular, atherosclerosis prevention and regression, cancer prevention, regression, dementia? Or do you want to do it with a diet that the low carb, high fat diet seems to be associated with longer mortality risk or higher mortality risk long term? That's what is most disconcerting, as never mention the environment, never mention animal rights, never mention long-term mortality and cardiovascular risk. And sounds like a great diet, except maybe we ought to be talking about those 4 kind of aha moments.
Love
it. All right, so you told me about a movie. It's called The Widowmaker. In that movie, they talk about the coronary calcium test. Can you tell us what that test is and what do you think of it?
Hot information. Everybody get out a paper and pencil, write this down. So you're right. There is a documentary called The Widowmaker on the variety of sources. You can watch a movie. Highly recommended. It documents the development of a test that's available in every medium and large city at a hospital using a modern CT scanner, where if you are sitting there at age 45 and your cholesterol's bad and your father had bypass at age 52, but you say, I feel fine, I go to the gym, I don't have heart disease. You lie down on a gurney, you get pushed into a CT scanner for about 15 seconds, you go out, you go home. There's no IV, there's no injection, there's no exercise, and you get a report back. And the beauty of it is, the beauty of a horrible disease is the heart normally has no calcium. The heart is made of water, fat, blood, muscle. There's nothing calcified. It sits in the chest, and around it is a lot of calcium, the ribs, the sternum, the vertebra in the back. So they show up white on a CAT scan. So normally the heart looks like a bunch of black and gray tones, and there's all this white around it. But if your arteries are getting diseased with plaque and atherosclerotic, almost always, like 98, 99% of the time, part of the process of atherosclerosis is deposition of calcium in the wall of the arteries. And even minute amounts will show up because of the contrast with the rest of the heart. So this CAT scan, the heart calcium scan, or coronary artery calcium scan, can detect heart atherosclerosis, years before a heart attack, years before a bypass, years before a stent is needed. Really, I talk about it's like a 2-week pregnancy test. At the earliest stage, when you might wake up and say, those donuts, the skipping the gym, my smoking, my 44-inch waistline, whatever it is, need to address it. And there's some data that people are more compliant with their lifestyle, more compliant with their medications, if they know. So I always argue, I like to use Gary Shandling, and I don't know anything in detail, but famous comedian that died about June or May of 2016. I tell my patients that, so you get a number out of this scan, and if it's 0, you have no calcium in all 3 of your major heart arteries, and your 5 to 10 year chance of a heart attack is unbelievably low. And event-free survival, fancy words. And if you have a calcium score of 50 or 500 or 750 or 900, you got some nasty arteries you didn't know about, because usually you do this on asymptomatic people, and you don't do it if you've already had a diagnosis of heart disease. You've had the bypass, you got it. If you had the stent, if you've had a catheterization that showed some 30 or 50% blockages, you have the disease. But, take a guy, I tell my patients, don't be, disrespect, don't be Gary Shandling. You've got a high calcium score. If you burp, if you have heartburn, if you have pressure, if you're sweating, if you're out exercising, you get short of breath, I go to the emergency room immediately. Don't take risks, don't take Maalox, don't take apple cider vinegar, get checked, because it's a wake-up call. Now, in my clinic, I actually work with people to reverse the plaque and the calcium and see some pretty stunning results, of which, of course, I know it at Oil Plant-Based Whole Food Diet is the core of it, and along with stress management, exercise, and a couple of secrets I can't tell you.
Okay, so let's switch topics here real quick. We talked earlier about erectile dysfunction, so now I want to get into the nitty-gritty details here. So you write prolific articles on many websites, including one about how to eat your way to better sex by eating foods that promote blood flow to your genitalia. This is a super important topic because a lot of people who suffer from diabetes also have either erectile dysfunction in men or poor sex drive in both men and women. But most of these people have no idea that it's actually related to what they're putting in their mouth. So can you tell us how food affects blood flow in your genitalia and how to eat for incredible sex?
Okay, everybody, if the kids are around, get them to go outside and color or use their Xbox or something. So
Earmuffs.
actually, I found, and I don't know, it's a absolutely, fantastic strategy, but heart disease, talking about your risk of heart attack, talking about your risk of stroke, doesn't get many people to go get that heart check or change their lifestyle. Fear doesn't work very well and all. So when I talk in public crowds, one aspect I talk about is the data that if you work on your lifestyle to promote clean arteries, you're also going to have better skin, better complexion, less wrinkles. There is some data that if you pack your diet with vitamin C rich foods, which is fruit and vegetables, brightly colored carotenoids, you'll have better skin complexion and color. That usually gets the women on board to at least pay attention and hang with me. And for the guys, they call it my LYDD plan. And they also, what's your LYDD plan? I call it the like your dick diet. And it, because if you'll think about the fact that we have to educate them, that 3 to 4 years before a heart attack, a good number of men have found that they're having erectile dysfunction. And maybe it's stress at work. Maybe I had too much to drink last night. Maybe I didn't eat that third piece of lasagna. Maybe, she or he doesn't look as attractive as they did 25 years ago, whatever they're thinking. The reality is their plumbing's getting clogged up. And whether it's that the arteries to the penis are smaller than the heart arteries, except for a few of us manly men know. In general, they are smaller. And they can get clogged up earlier, whether it's actually just endothelial dysfunction. The drugs Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra all work by correcting endothelial dysfunction to the blood vessels, to the male genitalia, fancy words. So anyways, whether it's endothelial dysfunction, that's a wake-up call. So, if your partner, if you notice that you're having erectile dysfunction and you're 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, you need to know your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your particle numbers, and I would strongly urge to know your calcium score. So how do you eat to prevent it? You eat foods that help your endothelium. You eat as many green leafies as you can tolerate, whether they're kale, bok choy, collard green, mustard green, turnip greens, and the 24 varieties of spinach that Robbie has memorized. Beets, we've learned that beets and beetroots and juicing and are tremendous, why many athletes are using beet powders as nitric oxide boosters. They also work as endothelial improvement in terms of sexual enhancement. Certain nuts and seeds, almonds are pretty rich in arginine. Pine nuts are pretty rich in arginine, and arginine builds nitric oxide. So these are strategies to eat, and it's all plant-based, no added oil. There's not enough data. There's a little data about lifestyle preventing erectile dysfunction and even lifestyle reversing erectile dysfunction. And clearly it's important, but the real wake-up call is if things aren't going up, get up off the couch, get yourself to a cardiologist or your internist and get checked. And probably that heart calcium score is the best thing to do. Good point, and always a great message to the public in terms of, what I'd want them, just don't drop dead. I'll just throw one other out there. I wrote a blog this week that's out on the web. This is a really odd one. It may have something to do with plant-based nutrition. You can develop a deep crease in your earlobe, right where I'm touching. It's called a diagonal earlobe crease, a DELC or a DELC. And it turns out that is almost as accurate as a stress test in predicting the presence of severely blocked heart arteries. Wow. And this was suggested about 40 years ago in a journal. We kind of lost it for a while, called Frank's sign, after Dr. Frank who described it. But in the last 5 years, all over the world, there's been studies using some gold standard of heart artery diagnosis and comparing it to the present. And you start watching people, you're going to start getting nervous when you see a relative or a friend with a deep earlobe crease. Hey, the web and Google my name and that topic, you'll see a blog with all the scientific data. That I have people come to my clinic. Why are you here? I have the earlobe crease and I want a cardiac workup. I may be the only cardiologist in the world that can say that, but it actually is valid and reasonable. It's not 100% accurate, but a stress test isn't 100% accurate. So it may be vitamin C again. Arteries are made of collagen. Your earlobe's made of collagen. Collagen requires huge amounts of vitamin C. Think of a gorilla just picking leaves all day long and eating for their sustenance. We don't do that, but we have the same biochemistry in terms of collagen and vitamin C as a gorilla. And we have generally relative vitamin C deficiencies in our diet. And that poor structure and collagen structure of the earlobe may be that subtle clue for poor structure and integrity of the actual wall of your arteries. Very, very interesting hypothesis.
So going back to what you're saying earlier, it looks like erectile dysfunction or poor blood flow to your genitalia is it's a marker, it's a predictive marker of heart disease in the future. And you said that it's usually 3 to 4 years before heart disease sets in.
Yeah, that's the data that, there are guidelines from the urology societies that say erectile dysfunction, see a cardiologist. Now that doesn't happen enough. And it is about that 3 to 4 lag, 3 to 4 year lag. But if you'll get that advanced blood work, get that heart scan for $100 in your community, change your lifestyle, change your diet, get the saturated fat out, put your beets and your greens and your pine nuts and your vitamin C rich fruits and vegetables and persimmons, you may well correct the problem and never, run into a cardiologist cath lab table.
And just so everybody knows that's listening or watching this, we're going to link up these articles that Dr. Kahn is talking about so you can read them and look at this stuff thoroughly.
Triple X material.
Let's talk a little bit about support and community. So you lead a group in Detroit called the Plant-Based Nutrition Support Group.
Correct.
So how does that function?
Yeah, that was, we're very proud of that, but it was a phone call nearly 3 years ago from a gentleman in Detroit. It's a quick story, but he had been in the Cleveland Clinic hospital. He had driven himself in Detroit to the Cleveland Clinic about half a year before my phone call. He was waiting to have bypass surgery. He had been developing angina, chest pain, playing tennis, failed the stress test. On a catheterization, one artery was 100% blocked, 2 were 60% blocked. He was told you need bypass, and he did his research and said, I want to go down to a hospital that has a McDonald's in the lobby. So he went to the Cleveland Clinic, but to their credit, they've kicked McDonald's out of their lobby. And the night before his bypass, sitting in his hospital bed, his cardiologist said, I doubt you'll be interested, but we got this, older cardiologist or physician who believes he can treat heart disease with diet. Do you even want to know about him and talk to him? And that was Dr. Esselstyn. And so Paul Chaplin checked himself out of the Cleveland Clinic in a very bold manner and became, the prophet of Dr. Esselstyn. He has not had a drop of added oil, and a whole food plant-based diet has been his only diet now for 3.5 to 4 years. And he dropped the weight, dropped the cholesterol, lost the chest pains in a few weeks, which is just amazing. And now passes his stress test and works out and has never had the bypass. He called me and said, I'm lonely. Who else eats like this? I can do it, but I don't have any, wife was supportive, but not on board, and family and all. So I said, and he found me just because he knew that I would probably, pay attention to what he was saying as a supporter of that type of approach. So we created a plant-based nutrition support group. We thought 10 people would show up at a hospital conference room, some snowy February 2014. And I'm not sure how, we still don't know, but 140 people showed up. The room held about 60. We said, I gave a little talk about why oil is not necessarily artery friendly. We took emails down and we said, let's try this again in March. And it was another kind of crappy Michigan weather day, and about 160 people showed up. At that point, the hospital said, you're violating the fire code and you're a seditious group because you're talking about preventing heart disease and stents and bypass with nutrition. We haven't approved your dietary plan. So we moved it over to a high school auditorium. We've never gone back. They never invited us back. But there's now 3,000 members. It blows my mind away. And the website, pbnsg.org, plant-based nutrition support group.org, and the Facebook page has thousands of followers with cooking videos and lectures. So we've had the privilege now, although we have no money in the organization, we just struggle and do what we can. We've had Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Barnard, Rip Esselstyn, Rich Roll, Chef AJ from LA is coming in actually next week. And been able to really give people the knowledge, the empowerment, the friendships. And what we did, I've lectured out at Saddleback Church in Orange County and Pastor Rick Warren a few times on plant-based nutrition. And they've built this tremendous health plan based on small Bible groups of 5, 10, 12 people that get together on a regular basis. So community. So we kind of mimic that. We have small groups all over Detroit. And people, I see pictures on Facebook. I haven't even visited any of them. But, they're having a potluck one night, and these are completely and strictly. You have to swear an oath to Dr. Esselstyn, once a month, that you will not add oil to your food. And we've attracted people that are managing diabetes, managing weight, managing, blood pressure issues. There's people clearly looking just for their now renewed sexual ability. They're looking to find a mate, which is fine. No, we haven't officially had a plant-based dating service, but I just see people leave in pairs out of the auditorium and they come back smiling. I don't even know what's going on. All those rituals just have them so powered.
That's so good.
So good.
Oh man.
Yeah,
All
we,
right, so
we need the plant-based love van to go around Detroit. I think that's our next venture.
you talked about this a little bit with the Daniel plan we've created, but just in general, why is the support so important? Why is it so helpful?
Yeah, it is still, it's easier than it ever was. You can go online and buy a zillion healthy, maybe organic, oil-free products. We've got the big marketers of Costco and others that have brought in organic produce and lots of produce. Kroger's is the biggest provider, I think, in the United States. I mean, access, and many restaurants have responded, but the bottom line is we're still fish swimming upstream in terms of popular culture. And it can be challenging. We know there's naysayers that'll always, and are knocking people down, coworkers, family members, spouses, children, and unfortunately the medical community that tells people, because there's so few plant-based physicians. They're growing and the conferences are growing, but in my city of Detroit, when people ask me, I really want a plant-based primary care doc of some kind, it's a very short list, and sadly a very short list. So I mean, it can be really difficult, and we know from Weight Watchers and Overeaters and Alcoholics Anonymous that peer group is really the key. And when you hang around people that have good habits, you develop good habits. So there's a statement: if you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk a distance, walk with somebody else. And that's what we're hoping. People will do this long term, and they've made new friends, and their belief is high, and their ability to resist the naysayers, the new headline, the new book, the new PBS special that seems to negate what they're doing. By the way, I have a public television special right now that's all over the country talking about, amongst other things, plant-based nutrition and Dr. Ornish's data. And proud that may be the first time the 5-letter word vegan has been said on public television. So we're making inroads.
So what is the show and how do people see it?
It's my first book, was called The Whole Heart Solution, of which one of the heart solutions was the strong data about heart disease reversal with plant-based no-added oil diets. So if you check, particularly right now, it's playing all over the country. If you check your public television directory, you might find at 2 in the morning, I hope not, or 8 in the evening. It's one of the pledge shows. One of the giveaways is actually a NutriBullet, which is a pretty cool entry for some people to pack more fruits and veggies into their morning or their work environment. So, it's a typical public television pledge show, but I'm very proud that it presents, plant-based nutrition as the best approach for heart health.
Nice work. If I could give you a high five from here, I would.
No problem.
There you go. Okay, so we're going to play a game. It's called A Lot, A Little, or None. So I'm just going to rapid fire a bunch of foods at you, lightning round style, and you get to either answer a lot, a little, or none, based off of your recommendations of how much of these foods people should be eating.
Okay.
Okay. And I don't know if your recommendations change for people with diabetes versus people without diabetes, but this is specifically for people with either pre-diabetes or diabetes, okay?
Okay.
All right, here we go. Milk.
None.
Arugula.
Lot.
Beans.
Lot.
Tomatoes.
Lot.
Potatoes.
Lot.
Olive oil.
None.
Coconut oil.
None.
Bananas.
Lot.
Tuna fish.
None.
Corn.
A little. Maybe a lot. Go for it, a lot. Buy organic, though, because there's all GMO.
Okay, organic corn. Quinoa.
A lot.
Brown rice.
A lot.
Pears.
A lot.
Mangoes.
A lot.
There's only one answer for that, by the way.
I know. Robbie would absolutely
Yeah.
kick me out of his mango-centric life.
Mangoes a lot. Okay. Cheese.
Never.
Turkey.
Never.
White rice.
Yeah, a lot.
Okay, explain that one. White rice a lot.
Yeah, you look, it depends what you pair it with, but if we go to Japan and we go to, a large country with a huge experience that the majority of their calories are from carbs, sweet potatoes in Okinawa, 60% of calories. They have, again, as Robbie mentioned, dozens of varieties of Okinawan sweet potatoes. They tend to be purple, actually. And then the rest of Japan that used a lot of white rice, you had almost no adult diabetes present in the country till oils and fast food came on board. So if you're physically active and you have a fruit and vegetable white rice diet, we also know if you go back to the 1940s, Walter Kempner and the famous rice diet at Duke. I mean, he reversed the most serious complications of hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease with the most bizarre diet in the world. And it worked, and it was peer reviewed, and celebrities all over the world like Buddy Hackett would go to eat his white rice and fruit and vegetable diet. And it worked, and there's no doubt it worked. It's just a difficult diet to maintain. But so white rice, yes. But you can eat white rice and throw on olive oil and throw on, peanut butter, and, and then you're just kind of mixing things and making an American diet version. It's not going to be very healthy.
Okay. Good. I love this. Okay. Fruit smoothies.
How little?
Little. Okay.
How little?
Salmon.
It's still the whole fruit. If you said fruit juice, never. Fruit smoothie, you're still maintaining the fluid, the water and the fiber, but there still may be a little difference from just eating that apple whole in terms of volume and complexity. Salmon, never.
Okay, so going back to the fruit smoothie, you would say that eating the whole fruit is better, but if you're going to put it into a smoothie, then it's okay as long as the fiber is still maintained instead of juicing it where the fiber is removed.
Yeah, I follow the credo, and I'm sure you agree. If you're going to juice your vegetables, eat your fruit. And if you're going to make a smoothie, 80% veggies, 20% fruit max. And if you're a diabetic, you better watch your blood sugar. If it doesn't work for you, either change it to add more complex. Like I barely turn on the blender when I'm making smoothies. I call them chewies. And you're literally, there's more like a baby food. I like the ability that it's still got some grit, and I still get some dietary nitrate tongue interaction and all that. But if it's not working for you, abandon it. If it's driving your blood sugar crazy.
Okay, fantastic. So salmon, like you said,
never.
None. Okay.
We could even talk about environmental toxins. I check mercury levels on my patients in their blood, and which is just recent exposure to mercury and arsenic. And I'm telling you, 20% of my patients, some of which are vegan and some of which are, omnivores, have high mercury levels all the time. And, they're so shocked. But it's the sushi and it's the salmon and it's the state of the waters in the United States and the international world, which is very sad. But it's toxic to eat some of these food products, including arsenic from chicken and such.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay. Almonds.
Almonds, a little. Handful.
Walnuts.
A handful, a little.
Cashews.
Handful, little.
Pistachios.
Same answer, handful, little.
Okay. Dates.
Yeah, a lot.
Love it. Okay, we got lentils.
Oh, a lot. Lentils. Love your lentils.
Very good. Butter.
Never eat your butter. I was in LA last week and they have a butter tanning salon. I imagine you put it on your face. I'm not even a proponent of that because there's still animals suffering. Or go watch Marlon Brando's movie, Last Tango in Paris, if you want to use butter, but do not eat it.
Okay, very good.
Go back and watch that movie for a very inappropriate reference.
All right. So if butter's out, what about butternut squash?
Bring it on, baby. All those acorn squashes, and that's where you really see how many squashes are there and how many varieties. So use them all. Pumpkin, amazing stuff.
Yeah, butternut squash, acorn squash, zucchini squash, kabocha squash.
Yeah.
Yep. Carrots.
A lot.
Chicken.
Never, never, never. Just America's favorite muscle building food that causes erectile dysfunction like no other. Very high in saturated fat. Yeah.
Okay. That's always one of those foods that's marketed as being healthier because it's leaner and it's white, and therefore people believe that it's actually a better alternative than eating red meat, but it's actually not the truth.
There's no fiber. Just put it in your blender if you love it so much. No, it's terrible. That's let alone the chicken industry and all the horrors going on there, and super antibiotic resistance that's coming up, and the hormones and the way they inject salt into chicken to make its volume higher, and you get the salt load out of eating chicken and your blood pressure goes up. Just, part of that's the food industry's fault, and part of it is the native nutritional value of meat-based products and their native inflammatory nature.
Okay, excellent. Tofu.
A little.
Pumpkin seeds.
Soybeans a lot. Tofu a little. Sure.
Okay. Pumpkin seeds.
A little.
Okay. Flax seeds.
I'm all for a lot. Ground so that you get all its nutritional value. But yeah, a lot.
Okay. Very good. Grass-fed beef.
Bullshit beef. Is that what you said? I'm sorry. It just got
cut off in the
100% bullshit. American, free-range chicken eggs and grass-fed beef. Yeah, never. I mean, great marketing ploy. Yeah, I know there might be a little more omega-3. Why don't you just take alfalfa and filter it through a cow and, get your omega-3. Just eat flaxseed and algae and greens and walnuts if you want omega-3. Don't filter them through a 1,000-pound animal that's suffering most of its life. Crazy.
Okay, brilliant. All right, and now there's this other food. Maybe you're not that familiar with it. They're called avocados.
Oh, there we are again. Boom, boom, boom. No, yes. It really is, there is data that a whole avocado may lower your lipid values. That's a biomarker, and that's a good trend. And there is fiber in avocado, and there's a lot of phytonutrients in avocado, and they are delicious. But do we know for sure that there's a neutral or beneficial impact on endothelium? Never been studied. The great avocado erectile dysfunction study, or on coronary plaque. I mean, until it's resolved. So what I advise people, if you have serious cardiovascular disease, or you're actively working on reversing adult diabetes, follow the program. Follow Dr. Esselstyn, follow Dr. Ornish, follow Dr. Bernard, which were generally avocado-free programs. If you're a free-range, 100%, plant-fed human, but you're healthy, there's clearly a role for some avocados in your diet with no guilt.
Okay, so you gave us a lot of great information today. Can you boil it all down in a simple, short, under 60 seconds? What is your dietary recommendations for somebody living with diabetes?
Yeah, so it is whole food, plant-based, no added oil, emphasizing organic because environmental toxins are important, and extending that to plastics and microwaving and all that. Be very mindful of all that. But fear not the fruit, and fear not the starchy carbs. They, in fact, should power your health. Go read about heroes like Penn Jillette, and read about what he's done. Read about heroes like Robbie Barbera and what he's done. Read about Mark Ramirez, who's a former University of Michigan football linebacker, now AT&T exec, who melted away over 10 years of adult diabetes, now drug-free, and he has his manhood back. And he likes to talk about his manhood in his Latino community, which went away by eating fruits and vegetables. The problem went away. So yeah, that's what I do.
Great. So whole food, plant-based, no oil, yes fruit, yes starch.
Absolutely.